Soumitra Das, who's the chairman and ED of Healthy Climate Initiative, to come up and invite his panelists to come up. And they're going to be, like I said, talking about using data in climate change and climate action. Come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch. I'm so thrilled to be here with you today, and we have a great panel. The first one is Anusha Dandapani. She is Chief Data Analytics Officer at UNICC. With a wealth of experience in the financial sector and recognized globally for her contribution to data, Anusha will share insights about intervening, leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data analytics for sustainable future. Following Anusha, we'll have Dr. Manu Gupta, co-founder of Seeds. Manu. Dr. Gupta's work includes building resilient communities and creating national open data platform for loss and damage. Finally, we have Dr. Vanak. Dr. Vanak is a director of Center for Policy Design at ATREE, an ecologist with a rich background in wildlife science. Dr. Vanak expands diverse range of topics, offering valuable perspectives on the science-policy interface. So in the next 40 minutes, the speakers will enlighten us on how information can shape a smarter, more resilient planet in the face of climate challenges. So without further ado, let us dive straight into the session. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed speakers, Anusha Dandapani, Dr. Manu Gupta, and Dr. Vanak. Thank you. So the way we have structured this session is that each speaker will speak about 2 minutes about themselves and their work. Right after that, I'll moderate some few questions, about 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'll open it for the audience to have questions for them. Is it okay? Thank you. With that, Anusha, you go first.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Anusha Dandapani. I'm the Chief of Data and Analytics Services that we offer to all the UN partner agencies at United Nations International Computing Center. In this role, my mandate is to support and serve all the UN partner agencies with their data needs and also with their artificial intelligence needs. And we do bring their use cases to fruition from all the way from ideation to implementation. So it's an end-to-end bringing the data value chain to reality is the role that I play at United Nations International Computing Center. And I'm also adjunct professor. I teach a course in data science, which is very much focused on how do you apply data science in solving impactful problems, and then also how can we leverage data in data-driven storytelling. So this is my focus area, so I'm pretty happy to be here and share a few thoughts on this exciting topic of climate change. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anusha. Manu, you go next.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me and having me here for this panel. I've been here since morning and enjoying all the rich discussions that have been taking place. So I head a nonprofit called Seeds, and our basic mandate is to assist communities that are impacted by natural hazards and impacts of environmental degradation. Over the last few decades, we've been reaching out as implementers directly to communities, helping them after emergencies. in form of relief assistance, recovery, and then long-term resilience building. We've reached out to about 6 million people around the country and worked in about 37 emergencies. And even as we are working, we realize that there is very less that we have been able to achieve in terms of the overall impact and the growing challenge of the impacts of natural hazards, disasters in our country. And so we have pivoted and looked at more of an enabling role in which we can reach out to larger number of people, yet be able to embrace the challenges that are there with context, with the type of impacts, with the diversity of our communities. But I'll speak more about that as we go along.
Thank you, Manu. Then Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, thank you. Really glad to be here at this panel and speaking to all of you this afternoon. I primarily come from an academic background. I'm an ecologist, and my main interest in terms of my research all of these years is looking at interactions and interactions between animal species, interactions between wildlife and domestic animals, and interactions between humans, domestic animals, and wildlife, and obviously the environment that they're all interacting within. And so that then leads to lots of interesting questions about what are the outcomes of these interactions. One that's of particular relevance to us as post-pandemic is how do diseases spread from wild animals to domestic animals and from wild animals to humans. So this has been an area of research for the last few years. We are in the climate COP, and so obviously everything's affected by the changing climate around us, and what are those knockdown or knock-on effects that have how our systems getting perturbed. What is the consequences of changes in those interactions along multiple axes, and how is that going to affect us? How is it going to affect food security? How is that going to affect the way we interact with the natural world, and even how we interact with ourselves? So this has been broadly the kinds of work that I've been doing, but more recently, I've taken over as the director of the Center for Policy Design at ATREE, and what we are trying to do is take all the work that we've been doing for a considerable number of years, 25 years at ATREE, and try and create more meaningful impact in the real world through policy change and also through analyzing existing policies. And I'm really happy to be part of this, and we'll probably chat more on some more other things, and we'll give you some examples on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vanak. So let us go into the moderator questions, and my first questions will be to Anusha. And the questions will be on interdisciplinary collaboration. So in your experience advising and partnering with UN, industry, and academia, how crucial is interdisciplinary collaboration in harnessing the full potential of AI, machine learning, and data analytics for sustainable solutions?
See, the complexity that we do see for these global challenges, right, like, such as climate change, poverty, and public health, all these crises do require a comprehensive approach. So what we see is to tackle it in a sort of a threefold approach. The first and the foremost, the way we look at it is that in the context of AI and machine learning and data analytics, it's more about the interdisciplinary collaboration that we need to bring to the table for several reasons. Yeah, one, it's because it allows us for a more holistic understanding of the problem. It helps us, like, bring different kind of disciplines and give the opportunity to bring unique insights. And also, how do we contribute is by bringing different kind of data sources and to contribute to not only to a richer nuances, but also tackling contextual use cases such as food crisis and understanding how the flood crisis evolves. And so some of these things does require for us to bring richer data sets to the problem solving itself. The second is in the interdisciplinary collaboration that we see is that integration of diverse data types. What we mean by that is that in order for us to enhance and make our AI models work in a robust fashion, we definitely need to bring in that real world problems that needs to be tackled. So we do make sure that the integration of diverse data sets is part of our thought process. And the lastly is to fostering collaboration between private, public, academia, and also promoting this public sector translation of research findings, yeah, because if you're not able to leverage the academia and the research, the thought process is around for us to make it actionable and scalable of these sustainable solutions. Yeah, so the real world applicability of AI and ML, machine learning, is only maximized if we bring this kind of an interdisciplinary team to work together. The synergy that we bring to the table, to the UN partner system, is to bring the collaboration of industry, the academia as the catalyst in driving the change. So those are the ways that we are looking at tackling this interdisciplinary collaboration.
Thank you, Anusha. Second question is to Dr. Manu Gupta. So this is about your work on National Open Data Platform for Loss and Damage. It's a great initiative. Many people in the audience may not be aware of this platform. So can you please give an overview of this platform and share insights into the challenges and successes you encountered in building this platform?
No, thank you for that question. And so I must make it, just to let you know that this platform is still in its development process. So we are just doing initial pilot testing on that model. But before I come to that, there were three major problem statements that this platform sought to address, and I thought I should share that. The first problem is, and it builds on my earlier introduction, is that due to the climate change impacts, we are seeing far more number of natural disaster events in our part of the world than they were in the 1980s. Simply said, it's actually doubled in overall terms every decade. This year, the Center for Science and Environment came out with a report which said that out of 273 days in 2023, 242 days, if I remember correctly, were days where there was a disaster incident in our country. So almost an event every day. So that's the kind of scale that we are looking at. The second problem statement was that giving compensation, giving assistance after a disaster impacts a family is a set process in our governance systems. There is a assessment done, and the government, according to the norms, gives out some kind of assistance as compensation, as relief. Now, the problem with that is, one, the growing number of people who are impacted, and because of that, the average assistance that the family would receive after a disaster would only be about 30% of what they have actually lost in that disaster. So which meant that the balance 70% is up to the family to be able to recover. And obviously, they would resort to any desperate means to be able to survive. So right from taking loans at very high interest rates from local money lenders to cases of suicide, desperate migration, all sorts of ways to recoup from that kind of gap. The third problem statement is around the coverage. In terms of the assistance that is given, there is very little coordination that was happening. So maybe the government was giving, the private sector is saying, well, we are ready to support, but we don't see those people out there. So a lot of people getting left out of this kind of support. So our idea of creating a national open data loss platform together with the government of India is to provide a digital ID to every person who is impacted or who's likely to be impacted in the country from a natural hazard. And linking it to the social security number, the Aadhaar, as you all may know, would allow us to be able to actually track over a time series what are the impacts of slow onset disasters, how much is the compensation available or being given to that family, and how is it coping up with the past impacts of that disaster. So as a result, there would be a better tracking of how the losses are covered. There is better visibility for people who are impacted, and they are also included in the assistance. And there is, because it is linked to the Aadhaar data, there is also some level of credentialing that happens, which allows all forms of assistance to come in. So our idea basically of creating this loss platform is that this becomes the building block for making sure that resources that are meant for communities that are affected by climate change reach them directly as possible.
Thank you. That's wonderful work. Going forward with Dr. Vanak, my question is on One Health systems. So given your interest in One Health systems and disease ecology, how can data be instrumental in understanding and mitigating the impact of diseases at the intersections of human, domestic animals, and wildlife?
Thanks very much for that question. Just following on from what Anusha was talking about, she said it's really important to be interdisciplinary in understanding data systems or in using data systems. And that's precisely what One Health is. Its very foundation is to look at interconnectedness. And the only way of doing that is by bringing in people from different disciplines, from different expertise, and trying to understand systems more fully. And this is where, when I introduce myself, I look at interactions. And ultimately, a lot of disease, at least infectious diseases, is interaction. It's a form of interaction of a pathogen with the human body. And the outcome of that interaction can be good or bad. Well, it's mostly bad. Or you can be good, you can fight it off. But those pathogens also live in a broader ecosystem. They are part of biodiversity. And so one of the first layers that you need to data in terms of information gathering is we want to understand what is the diversity of life out there. We are still discovering new species discovery all the time, but obviously also we're discovering new types of pathogens all the time. So it's important for that group of scientists to continue their work. But then we want to understand what's the ecosystem, or what's the complexity of interactions between those pathogens and the rest of the environment. What is their process of transfer from one individual or one kind of species to another? And that's where ecologists come in. Then if you're looking at domestic animals, then we need to bring in the animal health practitioners, or veterinarians need to come in. And finally, if you're looking at humans as our human health, then we bring in biomedical practitioners or public health practitioners. So there's a data flow or information flow at each of those levels. And the idea of One Health is that everybody's looking at it together. But of course, it's still a utopian idea, because the way we function is we have very strong disciplinary boundaries. We only hyper-specialize in our own fields. So there is a massive gap in that information flow from one vertical to the next. And that's what we want to try and bridge somewhat. And I'll give you one example of the kind of work that we've been doing. In southern India, in Karnataka state, there is a lesser known disease called Kyasanur forest disease. It was first discovered in about the 1950s, late 1950s. And it took an amazing group of interdisciplinary scientists to understand the pathways by which that disease affects humans, including the late Dr. Salim Ali, who's a world-renowned ornithologist. So we looked at this disease. It's a tick-borne virus, not very different from Lyme disease that many in the US and Europe may be familiar with. And it affects mostly poor people from tribal communities, forest-dwelling communities, plantation workers, and so on. And so we thought we knew the transmission cycle well enough now to understand what we can do. A vaccine was developed as well. But unfortunately, that vaccine was developed in the 1990s, and then it was never renewed. So now it's no longer effective, and they've stopped production of that vaccine. So we stepped in and we said, okay, what can we do to understand the system as it stands better? So then we got a whole bunch of different people again together, data scientists, geographic information system people, veterinarians, public health people, ecologists, social scientists, put them in rooms together and say, what kind of information do we need to try and address this problem? And then we co-produced the system that would then go into a model. And then that model fed into a decision support tool that's now available and online, and public health practitioners can now update their data onto that system and try and better understand where. So the model itself is a bit of a predictive model, so it helps you predict where the disease might occur given all the data sets that have been put into it. So land use data, weather data, animal, how much livestock is out there, and so on and so forth. So we were able to use that to better direct facilities by the government itself, and better direct educational awareness materials to the people, tell them that the easiest way of not getting the disease is to prevent getting bitten by ticks. Now, up till that time, the government used to say, don't go into the forest. I mean, that's easier said than done. These people's livelihoods are dependent on going into the forest every day. But we try to understand what are the behaviors that puts them most at risk of getting bitten by ticks. So we said, okay, if you're doing this, then make sure when you're coming back home, you check your body for ticks, remove your clothes, set them aside. We provided simple plastic, a tool. You can even make it from a plastic bottle to remove any ticks that you see on yourself. So these kinds of very simple interventions can go a long way to sort of prevent the occurrence of these kinds of diseases in the most vulnerable populations. So this is where sort of kind of all comes together on the field. Yeah.
Thank you. We have been used to working in silos for so long. It's hard for us to bring forward with working together with multidisciplinary approach, which is very important going forward. Thank you. Anusha, coming back to you, and this is about data governance. I cannot imagine how important it is. It is very important going forward in the future, the data governance part, especially when it comes to AI. Given the sensitivity of data in the UN context, how do you navigate the challenges of data governance and privacy while still leveraging the power of data for positive change?
This is a very deep question, by the way. We will perhaps need more time to address different layers of data governance. But our approach is, again, very much a collaborative approach and also equally a data-driven approach in order for us to involve our multi-stakeholders, in this case, not only our businesses, but also the communities, because within the UN context, it is very, very important for us to have this kind of coordinated and an inclusive approach. So what we essentially do is, when it comes to data sharing and data integration, we operate with the first principles approach to make sure that when we are handling these diverse data sets, we keep the data privacy and the personal information sharing upmost, and also the utmost reason for us to consider how do we want to protect the information, and especially from the human rights perspective, yeah. And also when it comes to sharing data between public and private partnerships, it's kind of becomes a little bit complicated because it also hinders the data innovation aspect of it. So the governance comes with the thought process that we are also human-centric in the approach of how we govern our data sets and the data sources, yeah? And we do want to make sure that our focus is to have the capacity building in our mindset, and how do we want to do that is by creating an awareness and a thought process around data stewardship and data champions, who we consider as the roles that we define within the organizations to not only to invest in this capacity, but also bring the community together to also tackle the approaches of data governance, yeah? But naturally, we do see data governance becoming the most sort of important component in not only managing our data sets, but also understanding how our AI use cases tend to evolve within the organization. So it is front and center in what we do, definitely.
Thank you, Anusha. I cannot imagine how important it is going forward in the future as AI coming into regular life. Yeah. Going forward to Dr. Gupta, this is about your community-led initiatives. So your work with SEEDS emphasizes citizen-led initiatives. How can local communities play a more active role in leveraging data to enhance disaster readiness, response, and rehabilitation?
Yeah, and that's a very relevant discussion point here. Like what my other panelists have also hinted at, the ability to be able to generate fresh insights that were not possible up until now. And in this particular case, when we are building the LAWS platform, one of the non-negotiables for us as the building blocks was that it should be generated by the communities themselves in a way which means that they report on what losses they have faced. This was to counter this whole approach which has been followed for generations, where a government official would go and follow a format of how he would define loss and damage, and he would basically be bringing in his biases in interpreting how the communities have suffered. So one classic case we came across last year is that in the state of Kerala, there were these floods along the upper elevations, and there was this one family who said that who was on the slopes, and their own home was next to a retaining wall, which was against that slope. And so this government engineer comes and says, well, has there been any damage to your home? And they said, well, nothing really. And he says, yes, nothing. But he says that, well, the retaining wall behind my house has collapsed, and my house will go anytime. But the government assessor says, that's not in my format. So I will sign off as no damage, against your house. So it's important to capture the nuances, how communities feel about those losses. And I think that's the starting point for building a whole range of possible use cases. Sometimes we don't know the solutions. We as externals don't have the best solutions for the communities. They know that better than us. It's about that data informing them about what are those potential risks, about that data being available to, let's say, the Met department, who can now downscale the early warning to be able to give them much more impact-based information. So I have 24 millimeter of rainfall in the next 24 hours. I don't know whether I'll drown or whether I need to escape. But if I can use my home data to tell me that your house, because of its nature, can collapse, or because of its location, can come underwater, then I can take a much more informed decision. So I think the potential of data driving decisions at community level, at family level, are tremendous. And there can be any number of them. Agriculture, farmers getting much better weather information, about housing that I spoke about, and many others that I think communities and people are very well positioned and have the wisdom to be able to take that decision. It's just that we don't give them the agency to take that decision. We take that away, and then we expect them to act in that kind of a vacuum. So I think that's the range that I'm seeing. Our models cannot even predict what is going to happen in future, and therefore there has to be a lot of scope for communities and entrepreneurs who are sitting in this room to come in and innovate and bring in those solutions that will answer future's problems of climate impacts.
Thank you. Very important work. Yeah, data by itself doesn't convey anything. And without data, I cannot imagine how we can make even decisions. So your work to provide that information and provide that predictive models that telling that, no, this is what it means to you, is hugely important. Also telling your policymakers that this is the data that is happening. Unless they understand it, they are making decisions in a vacuum. So this is great work. So going forward to Dr. Vanak, and your question is on human-wildlife interactions. So with your expertise in human-wildlife coexistence, what are some innovative approaches that can emerge from understanding the dynamics at the interface of humans, domestic animals, and wildlife, especially in semi-arid savannas and agroecosystems?
Thanks. I'll just continue broadly sort of the theme that I spoke about earlier, but also draw in a little bit more from what the other panelists have said. We've talked about and something that you mentioned earlier as well about policymakers looking at using information. Unfortunately, in many cases, policymakers may not even know the kinds of information that they need to collect for them to make informed decisions. And that's a barrier for many of us who work in this interdisciplinary field, because we're always looking at these complexities, these emerging complexities. And people who are familiar with AI and so on realize that there are lots of emergent properties that come from them. Anybody who studies the natural ecosystem understands that 1 + 1 does not necessarily equal 2. Sometimes you might get several orders of magnitude effects down the road. So trying to understand all the kinds of information that you might need. I mean, of course, we don't have the luxury of getting everything. You have to use Occam's razor from time to time. But when you engage with policymakers, they may not understand necessarily that you do need data from broad different fields for planning, for better emergency response, or whatever it is. And this sort of is well encapsulated also when we look at our interactions with the natural world. I mean, in India, it's been a long history of coexistence with the natural world, that we still have the largest population of tigers, the largest population of Asian elephants, and many other endangered species, stuff that was hunted out to near extinction in other parts of the world. India still is a thriving, has thriving biodiversity, despite having 1.4 billion people. What we need to do now is ensure that this continues in some form, and this is where we need technology to come in. And something that was started a few years ago, which unfortunately the pandemic the pandemic and the Ukraine war slowed down a little bit, is called the Internet of Animals. We've got, we have animals, billions of them roaming the earth, and if we can deploy sensors on them, so as wildlife biologists, we've been studying animal movement for a while, and this is something that I do. We catch them, we put a tag on them, it's a GPS unit or whatever, and you can see where they're going. But you can do more now, because the technology has, it's become smaller. So, in fact, the Max Planck Institute had put on a transponder on the International Space Station, and they developed these very small tags. Unfortunately, the Ukraine war, they had put it on the Russian side, Russian thing, and so they had to stop, and then all of their work stopped. But this is where we, with our technology, India is a leader in space technology. We really can push for this. Unfortunately, we are still bogged down. We are bogged down by a whole bunch of issues where, permit raj is rife. When it comes to wildlife research in India, it's a many-layered process. We need to break down some of these barriers, and then open up the use of technology for animals to become mobile sensors of the world around us. So if flood waters are rising, there are probably species dependent on riverine systems that can serve as early triggers. Same stuff with heat waves or extreme rainfall events, or just general monitoring of humidity, temperature, rainfall, etc. around us, and also their own response. So you can, for example, measure stress response of animals, and that will tell you a lot about what's happening in that environment. So there is a lot of potential. On a more day-to-day basis, people live with dangerous wildlife all the time. In India, millions of people are living with elephants, leopards, tigers, so on, in their backyard. So for us, it's we live in cities, for us it's a romantic experience to go, exotic experience to go to a national park or wildlife sanctuary and see these. But for many others, it's a matter of life and death. So knowing where an elephant is, if it's behind your house or somewhere nearby, it's on your path, can help save lives. Similarly, for the railways, animals crossing the track, it's bad for the railways, it's bad for animals. So those kinds of technology can be used to prevent those kinds of untoward interactions between humans and animals, and try and keep it good for them, good for us as much as possible. So there's a lot of scope for improved technology to really take this level of coexistence that we've had with animals all this while and push it forward, because our human population is not decreasing anytime soon. So there is a vast potential, and it's probably if it can develop, it's probably a multi-billion-dollar industry that can develop in India and we can see currently all equipment is imported from Europe or the US, and if we can start manufacturing some of these tags and some of these sensors in India, we can really get a head start.
Thank you so much. I have been informed that we ran out of time. We have to end the session. So please give me a round of applause to our esteemed speakers, Ms. Dandapani, Dr. Gupta, and Dr. Vanak. And thank you again for being part of this enlightening session. And I encourage you to connect with the speakers and explore further collaboration if possible. And let us carry forward this discussion and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.